All right, let's do it. Deep dive into Pablo Escobar. I've got all this amazing stuff he sent over, YouTube clips, interviews with his family, even a former lieutenant. So I'm ready to, I guess, uncover the truth behind the legend.
I think what's so fascinating about Escobar is it's not just a typical crime thriller. It really provides this window into the social and political dynamics of Colombia.
Mm.
And, his influence is still felt today.
Yeah, absolutely. So Escobar wasn't always a kingpin, though.
Right.
He had some pretty humble beginnings.
Oh, yeah,
Look
absolutely.
here.
Um, he started small time, petty theft. There are stories about him stealing tombstones, carjacking even. But there is this pattern of just escalating ambition and ruthlessness. It's like he was constantly testing boundaries and seeing how far he could go.
Yeah, and then he discovers cocaine. And this is where things really, really take off. And I mean that literally. He's building submarines to transport drugs.
The submarine thing is a perfect example of just how audacious he was. It wasn't just about moving the product. It was a statement, power, innovation.
Yeah.
He was operating on a scale that law enforcement just wasn't prepared for.
And then there's this infamous tax he levied on other traffickers, right?
Yeah.
50% cut or else. Pretty brilliant way to consolidate his power, but also pretty ruthless.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was a classic monopoly play. He wasn't just a competitor. He became the authority, right?
Yeah.
He controlled the cocaine, so he controlled the entire industry. And of course, the threat of violence was always there to ensure compliance.
It's just crazy to me that he was a wanted man in the U.S., yet he's posing for pictures with his son in front of the White House. It's like this ultimate power move.
Yeah. It speaks to his sense of invincibility, like he just thought he was untouchable. He was flaunting his power,
Mm.
you know, showing that he could reach into the heart of the U.S.
Okay, so we've got this empire built on cocaine and fear. But Escobar also had a taste for extravagance, right? Like the cathedral, his self-designed prison, which sounds a lot more like a luxury resort.
Yeah, the cathedrals. It was this really bizarre mix of opulence and captivity. He had parties there, jacuzzi,
Hmm.
a football field, even a telescope so he could watch his family in the valley below. I mean, it was a symbol of his wealth and power. But, also a reflection of his paranoia. He wanted to be surrounded by luxury,
Mm.
but he was terrified of being captured.
So it's this strange dichotomy, right? Lavish parties on the one hand and a reign of terror designed to avoid extradition on the other. Our sources suggest he was responsible for an estimated 10,000 deaths during this period.
I mean, imagine the atmosphere in Medellin at that time. Bodies in the streets,
Yeah.
bombs going off. It was a climate of fear, and it shows just how far Escobar was willing to go to stay free.
And this is where the story takes a very chilling turn. There's this incident with the models at one of his parties where one of them turns out to be an informant. And the outcome is, well, horrifying.
Yeah. It just highlights the brutal reality of Escobar's world. He operated under a constant cloud of suspicion. Anyone, even those seemingly close to him, could become expendable in a heartbeat.
So how do you even begin to catch a guy like this? The Colombian government, with U.S. backing, they form this elite unit, the Bloc de Búsqueda or search block. They're throwing everything they've got at him. Top soldiers, informants, high-tech surveillance.
It was an unprecedented manhunt. And the interesting thing is Escobar wasn't just battling the authorities. He was battling for the hearts and minds of the people. He cultivated this image of himself as like a Robin Hood figure, providing for the poor, building houses, and it earned him a degree of loyalty and protection that made him incredibly difficult to catch.
Yeah, it was a complex situation. You've got this powerful figure who can evade, capture, seemingly has the support of the people.
He's playing a dangerous game, and the stakes are incredibly high.
Yeah, and the Bloc de Búsqueda, they had another problem on their hands. A mole. A mole? You mean someone on the inside was feeding Escobar information?
Exactly. There was a young police auxiliary, and they found out that he was actually in Escobar's pay. Every time the search block would get close, this guy would tip him off. It just shows you the level of corruption they were dealing with.
So they're fighting this enemy who's practically invisible, and they've got someone working against them from within. Man, that's got to be frustrating.
It was a constant game of cat and mouse. The authorities always one step behind. But things started to change when Los Pepes emerged.
Los Pepes, yeah, I saw that in the sources. Who are they exactly?
Los Pepes, it stood for Perseguidos por Pablo Escobar, persecuted by Pablo Escobar. Basically, a vigilante group made up of Escobar's former associates, rivals, people who had turned against him, and they brought a whole new level of brutality to the conflict. I mean, they targeted anyone and everyone connected to Escobar, his businesses, even his family.
So it's not just the police anymore. He's got this whole other enemy now, and they're playing by his rules.
That's right. And their impact was significant. The bombing of Escobar's mother's apartment, for example, where his wife and kids were staying, that was a huge turning point. It forced Escobar to really prioritize his family's safety over everything else. It made him vulnerable.
He had always been ruthless, but now he was experiencing that fear, the desperation.
Yeah, exactly. And he tried to get his family out of the country, but it failed. So they basically became pawns in this whole thing, living under constant surveillance, moving from one safe house to the next. Escobar, for all his power, he couldn't protect them.
And that helplessness, man, it must have fueled his desperation. The sources mention that he started relying more and more on phone calls just to stay in contact with his family. He was even using taxis as mobile phone booths.
Yeah, he was taking more risks, making mistakes. The strain was getting to him. And the authorities, well, they were listening. After months of near misses, the Bloc de Búsqueda finally got their break. A phone call from a fixed line.
So he wasn't in a moving taxi this time. He was holed up somewhere. This was their chance.
The team, led by Major Aguilar, they converge on the location in a normal-looking house. They could hear his voice. The final act was about to begin.
Oh, I can only imagine the tension. This was the culmination of years of pursuit.
So they move in cautiously. They spot the taxi he used, and they hear his voice coming from the second floor. So they go up the stairs, anticipation building with each step. And then they see him standing by the window, phone in his hand.
And this is where it all comes down.
Yeah, in a split second, Escobar, he turns, he sees the officers, and everything just explodes. He drops the phone, draws his weapon, fires. Aguilar fires back, hits him in the shoulder. Another officer fires, hits Escobar in the temple.
Headshot. Sounds like it was over right there.
Not quite. Escobar, in a last act of defiance, throws himself through the window, tries to escape. Aguilar jumps out after him, wrestles the gun away.
Adrenaline pumping. They finally got him after all this time.
Aguilar grabs his radio, calls it in, yells, "Long live Colombia, Pablo is dead." The news, it spreads like wildfire. And soon, the whole place is surrounded. The entire Bloc de Búsqueda, crowds of people gathering.
Must have been a strange mix of emotions. Relief, disbelief, even a little bit of shock.
Absolutely, it was a surreal scene. The sources describe this mix of celebration, but also mourning. A real testament to the complex legacy of this man. To some, he was a ruthless criminal, a terror. But to others, he was, like a folk hero, a symbol of resistance.
And even in death, he's still creating intrigue, especially around the mystery of his fortune. $5 billion just gone. Where did it all go?
That's the question that has captivated everyone for decades. Some people think his family inherited it. Others say it's stashed away somewhere, buried, just waiting to be found. It's a real-life treasure hunt. And that's actually where our sources take us next. We follow Escobar's widow, Maria Victoria, and the kids as they relocate to Argentina, trying to build new lives under new names.
But can you really escape a shadow like that? I mean, can they really create new lives for themselves? Or does the past always come back to haunt them? It's tough to imagine, trying to outrun that kind of past. Especially with, billions of dollars potentially floating around out there.
Right. It's not like you could just, poof, make that kind of money disappear when you're trying to reinvent yourself.
So what happens with Maria Victoria and the kids in Argentina? Do they manage to lay low?
Well, they try to blend in new identities, the whole bit.
Mm-hmm.
Maria Victoria becomes Maria Isabel, the son Juan Pablo. He's now Sebastian American. They even get into real estate, trying for that legitimate life. But the whiskers start, right? Money laundering.
Ah, so maybe that's where the missing billions went, bankrolling the new life.
It's not that simple. See, Maria Victoria gets involved with this Argentinian accountant. Starts as a romance, but quickly becomes this whole money laundering scheme. Suitcases full of cash, flown in from Colombia, hundreds of thousands of dollars each time.
Wow, that's ballsy, even for, Pablo Escobar's widow. But kind of sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was. The accountant, driven by greed, basically turns on Maria Victoria, blackmails her for years using what he knows. The whole thing implodes when the entire family, accountant included, gets arrested.
So the law catches up. End of the road.
You'd think, right.
Yeah.
But twist. The charges are dropped because they can't actually prove the money is tied to Escobar's drug empire. And then get this, the accountant vanishes. Poof, gone.
He disappears. Wow. Did he take the money and run? Was he, taken care of? It's like a movie plot or something.
Totally. And it's a mystery that remains unsolved. Maria Victoria, she retreats from public life. Whatever secrets she had, they go with her. So we're left wondering, Did any of Escobar's fortune actually survive?
And this is where Sebastian American, Escobar's son, comes in, right? He gives this interview, and it sheds some new light on his dad's wealth, but it's not what you'd expect.
Right. Sebastian, he acknowledges the fortune. Massive. But he claims it wasn't stashed away in some secret account. It was spent on the war.
The war, you mean like the violence, the hits, the bribes, all funded by his drug money.
That's what Sebastian says. He talks about this constant outflow of cash to keep Escobar's network running. Weapons, explosives, sure. But also payments to police, judges, politicians, even claims a former president got money from Escobar.
So it wasn't just about building a drug empire, it was about, like, controlling the whole system. Man, that's a scary thought.
And incredibly costly, not just in money, but in lives too. Sebastian, though he looks a lot like his father, he expresses real remorse for what happened, for the damage done. He seems to be trying to separate himself from that legacy.
I can't even imagine growing up in that world, knowing what your father did. He even dismisses the money laundering stuff, saying if they had billions, a million wouldn't be worth the risk. Pocket money, he calls it.
Compelling argument, but
Um,
we're still left with questions. If the money wasn't hidden, wasn't inherited, where did it all go? Did it just disappear in the chaos?
Well, it seems like the mystery of Pablo Escobar's fortune might just stay a mystery. We've uncovered a lot, though. His rise, his fall, the brutality, the corruption that allowed him to thrive. But like you said, more questions than answers.
The story of Pablo Escobar, it keeps drawing us in, right? And maybe, just maybe, the truth about his empire is out there, waiting for someone to find it. Who knows, maybe they'll be one of our listeners.